Welcome back, everyone. Sean Hegarty in for Lee Conklin today, taking continued our look back at 2014 or 13 rather, and what could be coming up for 2014. Nolan Rosenkrantz with the Toledo Blade joins us today. He's the education beat writer. Nolan, we talked with Taylor just a little bit ago about changes at the top for the Toledo Police Department, so we'll talk to you about the change at the top for the Toledo Public Schools. Dr. Romulus Durant in, Dr. Jerome Pecco out. What do you think is going to be the biggest change between the way the two of them do business?
I think there's going to be a lot of changes. I mean, number one is just kind of in attitude. Jerome Pecco was a really experienced guy in education and had a pretty laid-back style in the central administration. A lot of people used to call him Pops, was his nickname. And he kind of had a grandfatherly sort of way of dealing with people. I wouldn't want to say he was hands-off, but he gave his administration a lot of room to kind of make their departments their own. And one of those guys was Romulus Durant, who started a lot of initiatives or particular projects that, Jerome Pecco had a lot of support for them, but they were mostly Romulus Durant, like the Student African American Brotherhood, which became Young Men and Young Women of Excellence, which has been really hailed around the city for giving kids kind of their own it's sort of peer mentoring and peer leadership, making these kids, a new crop of leaders in our city. But there's other things that Dr. Durant was kind of in charge of. Like, he really pushed keeping a boys' academy in the center city, Martin Luther King Academy for Boys. There was a time when that was going to actually close, when it was Lincoln Academy, and they closed Lincoln. They kind of shifted the concept over to Martin Luther King because he believes very strongly in sort of gender-based education is probably the wrong term, but these single-gender schools. Right. It's not for everybody, but he really believes that isn't a really effective concept.
So before we go forward, Dr. Durant, what is the sentiment around the district? Was the time of Dr. Pecco a success? It was a short time. Was it successful?
Yeah, I mean, it's 3 years, which is actually not that unusual for superintendents. They're kind of like baseball coaches. Sometimes they have very short tenures, and there's a lot of turnover. Wasn't a success. I mean, they didn't get new money levy passed, and that was a really big hope. And test scores more or less stayed, stagnant. But he kind of brought a stabilizing factor to the school district. There wasn't anything crazy that happened, like the Dan Burton stealing a bunch of money from the school district. It happened before, but they did have the data scrubbing situation last year, which wasn't a Pecco initiative. That probably went the whole way back to Eugene Sanders, but that did happen during that time. It's really hard to gauge these things at the time because some initiatives take much longer to kind of draw out how effective it's going to be. But you don't hear a ton of criticism, as Jerome Pecco say, as a person. Right. Everybody who met him says, he's a very nice guy. He has a ton of integrity. He never shied away from answering hard questions. You probably experienced that too.
Sure.
He always called you back. You might not have a good answer, but he would always call you back and talk to you about it. But he wasn't brought in to be necessarily a game changer. His was in a lot of ways a long-term interim.
So will Dr. Durant then, at least expectation-wise, could he be the game changer for the district?
That's the hope. I mean, in some ways, you can already say he's making a difference in just pure attitude and enthusiasm about the school district, both in the community and within Toledo Public Schools. I mean, this whole TPS Proud thing, which has been a slogan for a long time, but now people are saying it, at every occasion possible. I mean,
sure, they all got the pins, and we had the toy drive out here. And I remember watching live on the air here, you had a couple of the cheerleaders and himself, and that was just kind of the last thing they really wanted to punch forward.
And, sometimes people make fun of he's got embroidered on his shirts and, on his collar, the TPS thing. But, I mean, for him, it really comes from sports, this time in football. This is all about, it's not just like branding, but it's like team pride.
Right.
You got to, pump yourself up for yourself. Otherwise, you're never going to believe in what you're going to do. So you can say, at least, from a pure attitude perspective, there's already been a change. One of the things that he does that people really like is he insists that his cabinet spends at least a period of time in each day out in schools. They're not just in their office kind of working on paperwork and things like that, that they're actually out there experiencing things, and has really energized the central administration and the student body. But the superintendent job, you could either say it's mostly managerial. I mean, there's a lot of your regulations you've got to follow, and
right.
Staffing decisions and things like that. Or you can say, I mean, those things are important, but what's really important is, inspiring kids, coming up with big ideas, which I think we're going to see starting in the next year. Some really
right.
big ideas that he's been talking about.
But could we also say that generating levy money is another big thing that he has to do as well?
Yeah, I mean,
they're going to have. I mean, more than likely they're going to have to go back to the ballot at some point, and they're going to have to ask for new money at some point.
Yeah, I haven't heard a lot of conversations about a new money levy because they're more or less stabilized financially for at least like a year, and depending on if a little more state money comes in or if their enrollment picks up, there might not be a situation where they absolutely need a new money levy. And then you get into the question of, is it a good thing to build community faith to go for a new money request if you don't absolutely need it? I mean, that was one of the debates last time. Was they weren't asking for a new money levy because they were going to have like a $30 million deficit and they were going to fire everybody. They did a new money levy because this would stabilize them long term and they could continue some initiatives they have. But that is sometimes hard to go to the community and say, look, we don't necessarily need it, but we think this is a good idea, so you should support it.
Right. That's going to be a tough sell, I would imagine, for any superintendent,
exactly.
Not necessarily just him. Let's look forward a little bit here. Testing-wise and scores, I know a lot of people live and die essentially by those numbers. What do you think is coming down the line as opposed to changes? Some of the testing has changed and some of the scoring has changed, and it's a process at this point. What do you see is going to be changing coming through in 2014? Will it be better or worse for school districts?
Well, the big change in Ohio is going to be the new tests that are tied to the Common Core state standards. And there's sort of a collaborative consortium, they call it, of states that are developing these different types of online-based testing systems. The consortium of Ohio is in is called the PARCC consortium. So if you have kids, you're going to hear people talk about the PARCC tests that are coming out. One of the complaints that people have is, in order to do these tests, like, you have to have computers everywhere for kids to take these tests at the same time. So that's expensive. And while the state is offering some support to pay for this technology, they haven't given them everything for it. So it's expensive. You sometimes have to do wireless throughout all of your buildings, so that's a really big process. So it's been somewhat of a headache. And places that have instituted the new tests, like New York City, just did, or New York State just did Common Core assessments, and I think Kentucky did them too, and the results were not good. I mean, there was significant drops on what they say are more rigorous standards and also this new testing concept, and that was shocking to people. And not only is it a difficult conversation to say, like, hey, your school was rated as an A before, and now you've been rated as a C or a D, but that will also affect principals and teachers, because there's a new evaluation system that's coming out too, where teachers' evaluations and principals are tied to student performance. And if all the kids do terrible on these new tests, well, that could significantly impact people's evaluations.
Okay, we'll watch out for that coming up this year. Nolan, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, John.
Going to talk a little bit about politics, what's coming up next for 2014. Skylar Meadows joins us coming up.